You'll see the vaccines get aggressively through the 1A, B, and C categories through the spring. And then individuals that are healthier have no other reason to get vaccinated except that they want it, which is a very great reason, and to be immune. Then it'll open up very widely at pharmacies with multiple options and so on. So that by summertime, a lot of these larger questions of vulnerability will be over.
Aloha. Happy Inauguration Day, everyone, and welcome to this forum on the science, safety, and efficacy of the approved coronavirus vaccines, as well as the ethics and social issues surrounding their distribution. This is a day of new beginning at the start of a new year, and we hope with the vaccines we're turning a corner on this year of plague and challenge. This forum today is designed primarily for UH faculty and staff, but everyone is welcome, and we hope to answer a lot of questions that will be applicable broadly. We've assembled a large group of experts in distinct disciplines to answer your questions we've been gathering through registration and on social media, and questions that we'll be taking live today. Our panelists are three professors from the John A. Burns School of Medicine, the Associate Dean, Lee Boyne-Consejo-Lam, an immunologist and vaccine development specialist, Sandra Chang, and Neil Palafox, who's an expert in health policy and health inequality mitigation. To talk about communication technologies and countering misinformation, we'll be joined by Su-Yun Shin, a communicology professor. And last, we'll be joined by our Lieutenant Governor and ER Doc Josh Green to talk about kind of policy direction moving forward and the decisions that we've made so far. My name is Robert Perkinson. I'm coordinator of the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series. I'll be playing host, and we will talk with each panelist in turn. While our guests, by the way, are not on screen, they will be available to answer your questions live in the Q&A module of Zoom. We also have student staff monitoring chat at Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, where we're broadcasting live as well, so you can find us there if you want to invite others. And so we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. To start off, we'd like to go right to a question that is pressing in many people's minds, like, when might you be eligible to get vaccinated and how is that going to work? So I'd like to welcome our first guest, Dr. Lee Boyne-Consejo-Lam. She's the Associate Dean at JABSOM, a professor of family medicine and community health. And she is UH's lead on vaccination and our liaison to the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency's pandemic response. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Lee has a couple of slides for us kind of explaining where we are now in terms of moving through Hawaii's prioritization list and what that means for faculty, with the caveat that, UH is not the decision maker on this, and there's a lot of moving parts, and neither is the state of the Hawaii the decision maker on all of this. But please, Lee, let us know where we are and how this is progressing right now.
Sure, thank you. And let me start off by welcoming everyone and wishing us a happy new year, and really moving forward together as we, as a state and as university and others, really work hard to address this pandemic well and together and equitably. I think we all have common goals and purposes. And keeping in mind that the big picture with all of the vaccine is that there's not enough right now. And so many of the questions that you have are very much directly related to how much vaccine we get, that we, the state, get every week. And then, there's a lot of logistics details, but I think it will be getting better. The vaccine supply will be getting better, but for now, just again, keep that in mind. But what this first slide is showing, it's an infographic that's on the hawaiicovid19.com/vaccine page, and that is a very important page And I would encourage you to bookmark it on your device and your computer and to memorize it, because really that is the definitive source of information about the vaccine. There's a registration link. As more opportunities become available to be vaccinated, that's where the registration link is. It has the link to the latest, updated executive summary about the vaccine plan, et cetera. And there's a huge team of communications folks, not just from within the DOH, but really there's a very large communications working group that includes multiple sectors and agencies, and including some of our folks who may not have computers and who may not have phones, and or for whom English may not be their primary language, or for whom English literacy might not be that great. And so there's a lot of good sharing and thoughts and information across the state. And so again, the hawaiicovid19.com/vaccine page is really where you should go. And so this is the graphic. And if you note from the top left, we are here. So the first one is really the 1A group. And, the healthcare personnel. So folks like me, I'm still a practicing, physician. And so I was fortunate to be able to get my vaccine, actually got both doses already. But healthcare personnel include not just the clinical care providers, but those who also really are highly exposed, to COVID patients or to bodily fluids. And so this includes transporters and others that are working in healthcare facilities. But our long-term care facility residents in Hawaii, that includes folks that are residing in community care homes and foster care homes. So it's not just those that are in a long-term care or skilled nursing facility. And so we still have a ways to go with that group. We still have people in the 1A group who are not yet vaccinated. And we have many in the community care home groups or our long-term care units that are still in the process of getting vaccinated. And so we are still in 1A. 1B, though, is what, is making the news now, right, with the opening of the public pod here on Oahu, and then with Queens opening, next week. Some of the neighbor islands have already started with their 1B, last week. Some hospitals started with 1B 1.5 weeks ago. And so you may ask, well, why is everybody starting at a different time, right? Or shouldn't we finish the 1As before we get to the 1Bs? So the answer, again, it's really dependent on how much vaccine is available at a particular, moment in time. And so from the very beginning, this prioritization allocation strategy has been suggested and it's based on this ethical framework, proposed by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. But you don't want to waste vaccine, right? And so we may often hear that the enemy of good is perfection, or some variation thereof, right? And so everyone is doing their best to stick to the priority allocations, but it is not necessarily sequential. So you can go 1A, and then if it looks like you have more slots available, you can, ask some 1B people to come. What the whole country is trying to avoid, including our state, though, is, we still haven't even gotten a tenth of the way through the 1B, and now we're opening it up to the people in phase 2, right? So we're trying to, that's the skip the line concept. So again, because we know the risks of COVID, and they're often associated with the work that we do and or where we live. If we live in a community with very, very high rates of COVID transmission ongoing, or with clusters, those folks, it's a balance, and it's a balance between the risk of death from COVID and the risk of transmitting. And so the other thing I wanted to point out about this slide is the 1C group is this third one, and note it says spring 2021. And so, we really just started the 1B group a week and a half ago. And the amount of vaccine that has come in this week, for example, it may sound like a really large dose, but actually only 18,000 of those approximately 33,000 doses, only 18,000 are for new first doses for 1B. The remainder are really the second doses for previously vaccinated people in the 1A group. So we have to keep that in mind. And then summer 2021 is when we hope that we get the rest of the population. And so another source of confusion has been, well, what is essential worker? And, all of education and post-secondary education is designated as essential. So why can't I get my vaccine now, right? And we know that that is really a very, very common question. I see questions in the chat, right? There's some folks that maybe have gotten their vaccine offered through Kaiser or through Castle or through Hawaii County or Kauai County, and others not so much. Again, it just really depends on the amount of vaccine available in the number one. And so we need to expect change. For example, with Castle, they started opening up to the Kupuna and to some 1B in the Department of Education a week and a half ago. And then very quickly had to say, oh, sorry, we actually ran out of vaccine. We're trying to, preserve it for the Kupuna. So thank you, but please wait, we will contact you again. And we're, so there is going to be some amount of appointment canceling because we're going to be shorted, and so another question has been, if you look at the actual vaccine doses, right, which is now on the Department of Health website, you're like, gosh, we're so far behind. And so one thing is to understand that the state received about 40%. So of the vaccine that they had planned and ordered between the December 19th or December 16th when they put in the order, December 16th to December 31st, they were shorted consecutively. And then 40% of that entire allocation came in the week between Christmas and New Year's, right? And so you've got the holidays and all the rest of the stuff. And once a vaccine comes, it's not like you can just say, okay, come on down. Right? It's a huge, huge logistical challenge. But we're catching up. And so all of the vaccine that's currently on island is actually allocated, for either the public pods or, again, we've got the counties, some in many counties doing 2 or 3 different vaccine sites. And so what we wanted to emphasize, and again, this is from the state level and also from UH, is that the frontline part of the essential workers, frontline essential workers, are really those who have to come to work, who have to be in close proximity, and who come into frequent contact with many people, whether it's coworkers or students or colleagues. And so for us at the university, these are some of our facilities and custodial and security staff, others that may be working in close quarters, in labs, or where they really don't have a choice but to come into work, folks like that, right? And in the non-education sector, these might be our grocery workers and many others. And you see here, number 4th bullet is the critical transportation sector people. And so this also makes up 11% of Hawaii's population. You think, oh, 11%, that's not bad. But actually, let's take a look, at the numbers. And so this is from the executive summary, which is available on the DOH website. And these are updated numbers by county, the population estimates that fall into these priority categories. And so, the first 2, the white lines are the phase 1A. And like I mentioned, that, so that's about, 68,000 people, and we're not done with them yet. So again, I just want to emphasize we're not done with the 1As. We obviously have started into the 1B population. The emphasis is on the Kupuna, and it's because we want to, again, balance that risk of death with the risk of transmission and with the need to keep society open. But with our frontline essential workers, 11% is 126,000 people, right? And the Kupuna is 103,000 people. And just on Oahu alone, that is 71,000 people, and we do not have 71,000 doses. So what happens is that the state puts in the orders based on these estimates and a ton of planning that has been going on since October, or actually earlier. The state will make orders. There's a daily, sometimes more than twice a day, reporting from our health facilities and our hospitals and from the counties and everyone. And then from there, the state, helps to make that determination, right? They put in the order, maybe they put in the order on Monday, but they don't know until Thursday afternoon what they're getting for the following week. And so then adjustments have to be made. And so if any of you or your families were some of the ones that were able to make an appointment with the kupuna at, say, Pier 2, for example, and the other day they were allowing, right, one caregiver to who's accompanying the kupuna to receive the vaccine. Well, we're not going to have enough vaccine. And so some of those people are going to be receiving, I'm so sorry, we don't have vaccine email. We need to cancel your appointment, not for the kupuna, but for the caregiver who is younger than 75.
Thank you very much for that. I think you're right. It's important for people to realize just how complex logistically this is, because we have to gather large numbers of people, some of them easy to reach, others of them pretty difficult to communicate with in a way that's safe and protects people from COVID transmission during the assembly for the vaccine. Plus we need to make sure that we've got them set up to be vaccinated twice. Plus the vaccines are rather demanding, especially the Pfizer vaccine, in terms of the storage requirements. So it's no small matter. Nonetheless, according to CDC data, some states are quite a bit ahead of Hawaii in terms of the percentage of their population vaccinated. And in your sense, that's because of the supply of the vaccine we've received, not because of any kind of challenges we're having in terms of staffing or
I think that's
staging.
That's a good question. I think the first large pod on Oahu, large meaning more than 600 a day and not based in a hospital, the first large pods were with the city and county of Honolulu. But even on that very first day, almost 600 doses were given. And since then, there's been a lot of lessons learned, a lot of debriefing and hot washes and sharing across the counties, and really learning what's working and what's not working. And so, that actually worked pretty well. And the vaccinations in the counties have actually been going pretty well. So the biggest limitation is the amount of vaccine. But then, with anything brand new, and this entire thing is brand new, it's going to take a couple of times, right, to kind of find that formula and that staffing, and let's get it right. And then, like with anything technology, there's, always some challenges with data that are continuing to be worked on. But the biggest limitation is really the amount of vaccine, and it makes it really difficult to plan. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the way that it is, and if our vaccine manufacturers can really, ramp up their vaccine and the distribution. And I must say, if and when the next set of vaccines do receive their emergency use authorization, which may be in a month or two, then it'll be better, because those companies like Pfizer and Moderna have already started pre-production, right? Kind of banking that their product is good. But again, so we're all hoping that, February will be better in terms of supply, but we just have to be patient.
So last question on logistics, and then we'll step back and talk some about the science of the vaccines and the findings from the research completed thus far. And that is just for faculty who are listening and wondering, what's going to happen. They've maybe filled out this questionnaire that President Lassner sent out. What are likely to be the next steps, and when, to the best of your knowledge, based on what we know now?
Sure, and that's a fair question. So first, to the over 7,000 people that filled out the survey, thank you very much. And so every employer is really being asked to do something similar in terms of determining a sub-prioritization. Like I mentioned, all of the education sector is 1B, but we don't have enough, right? And so we designed the survey so that each campus would be able to have a list and then be able to see like how many points, how many things you checked off is one way to prioritize. Now know that already based on job category and other things, there has already been some decisions about again the types of groups or employees or others that may be higher. And those are the ones I mentioned before, right? But if we do have to further sub-prioritize, that's what that information will be used for. In some of the counties, they're being used to actually give counts to to the counties so that they can help with the overall planning. The other important thing to know is that we are working with the Department of Health to not only get these numbers, but to figure out what makes the most sense in terms of delivering the vaccine to our UH population, and so we're hoping, but nothing is yet confirmed, but we are working on trying to, see if we can deliver some of the vaccine on somewhere on our UH campuses, but it's not confirmed yet. And, it may be, again, it's really dependent on supply, but the logistics is huge. To do 600 people in a 4.5 hour period takes 120 people, a staff, right, to do that. And so we know that there may be some sectors, in fact, that will be assigned to go someplace and get it. And so that exact assignment and where, that is still all in planning with the Department of Health.
Okay, thank you. I want to bring into the conversation now Sandra Chang, and we'll continue talking about logistics and the decisions that we're going to make about getting vaccinated, in the webinar and also in chat. So a lot of questions are piling up on chat. We have people who are trying to get to it. Lee and Sandra, after their segments end, will also be answering questions. So stay with us, stay patient, and we'll try to get to as many questions as you can. Dr. Chang is a microbiologist and an immunologist by training. She's worked extensively in vaccine development herself. She's a professor at JABSOM in the Department of Tropical Medicine, Medical Microbiology, and Pharmacology. And she's co-chair of the Department of Health's Vaccine Medical Advisory Working Group. And, we wanted to bring you in really because there's new technologies involved and varied technologies involved in the 2 preliminarily approved vaccines, as well as others in the pipeline. And I just think it would be helpful for people in a basic sense to understand what the different technologies and strategies are involved. I understand you've got some slides too, but aloha, welcome,
Yes.
And thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be able to share this information with the audience and afterwards answering questions that they may have. So I'm going to go ahead and get started to talk a little bit about the science behind the vaccines. Okay, so there are basically 4 different technologies that are used in vaccine development. Some of them are new and some of them have been around for a long time. The ones that may seem very familiar are the viral vaccines, which are either inactivated or weakened vaccines. So these are like measles, mumps, polio, those kinds of vaccines. And those are based on either weakening or inactivating somehow the agent or the pathogen that causes the disease and injecting that into a human being in order to raise the immune response to the virus. And that's been very successful and has had a tremendous impact on public health. Another type of vaccine that is also, that has been around for not a long time, but fairly long, are protein-based vaccines. And those examples of those are like the hepatitis B vaccine. And those are simpler than the viral vaccines. They're usually based on one protein that is being produced and then injected into a recipient. And it also can be a protein that assembles into particles that look very much like viruses. And so those are non-living vaccines. They're just proteins, and so they induce the immune response against the protein itself without really any potential of causing disease. The newer ones that are being introduced and especially are being developed for COVID vaccine development are the viral vector and nucleic acid vaccines. And these are newer technologies, and I'm going to go to the next slide and explain these 2 new technologies. As you can see here in this slide, though, there are many, many different vaccines in development. Right now, 2 have been approved, and they both happen to be in the nucleic acid category, but there are many more in the pipeline. And hopefully, once these get approved, it'll alleviate the pipeline, that the bottleneck that we are encountering because we only have 2 vaccines right now. Okay, so what I'd like to go through is first, the nucleic acid vaccines, because those have been approved for emergency use. And there are two types. One is a DNA vaccine, and the other is an RNA vaccine. And I'm going to focus on the RNA vaccine because that is the one that we are most interested in understanding. And so in this case, RNA is a molecule that codes for the proteins that can be recognized by the immune response and that can induce a protective response against the virus. And so what was done is that the genes for the protective proteins were sequenced, and then they were synthesized as messenger RNA molecules, and then encapsulated in these lipid bubbles that protect the messenger RNA and also allow for the RNA to be introduced into the cells. Because as you can see in this cartoon, the messenger RNA is enclosed within the lipid bubble and then fuses with the lipid membrane of the host cells. And this releases the messenger RNA into the host cells so that the cell itself can make the protein, which then will be produced by that cell and expressed on the cell surface or released into the environment and can be recognized by cells of the immune response so that you can make antibodies or cell-mediated immune responses to protect you against infection. The beauty of the messenger RNA vaccine is its intrinsic safety because it remains within the cytoplasm and does not enter the nucleus. And so it doesn't have any potential for being incorporated into the genetic material of the host or the DNA. And so it is a very safe vaccine for that reason. Moving on to the viral vector vaccines, there are two different types. One is a replicated one that does produce virus particles, and the other one is a non-replicating viral vector. And the examples of each of these are certain weakened measles viruses that are used as a replicating viral vector, and then adenoviruses that are used as these non-replicating viral vectors. The vaccine that is being considered for approval, that will be considered for approval for COVID, are these non-replicating viral vector vaccines. And these similarly contain the nucleic acid or the genetic material that encodes the proteins to which the host will make an immune response to protect them against infection. So in this case, it's being introduced into the host cells via these viral particles. They enter into the host cells, and again, the host cell is able to make these proteins and release it so that the immune response can be induced against these viral proteins. But because they're non-replicating, they cannot produce any infection, they cannot induce any disease. Okay, so both of these technologies that are being advanced should be fairly safe.
Can I ask a question too about the mRNA vaccines?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It was so incredibly fast after the first sequence of the virus was released.
Right, right.
You know, researchers had prototypes for the vaccine within days or at least weeks.
Yes, yes.
Is that likely to just, you know, change the way vaccines are developed forever after now, and we can expect faster development of vaccines for other infectious diseases, or is there something?
That's very high possibility because the reason why it happened so quickly is because the virus was isolated and the genome of the virus was sequenced very quickly because of current rapid sequencing technologies that can take place today. And so as soon as they had the sequence of the gene that they were interested in, they were able to manufacture these messenger RNA molecules, which is a pretty straightforward procedure. It's very quick. And so once they had the ability to make the messenger RNA, then it was just a matter of encapsulating it and testing it first in animal models, and then going ahead and testing it in humans once it was determined to be safe and what we call immunogenic. It induces an immune response in animal models and is also protective in animal models. So that was done very quickly as well. and then they advance to human trials very, very quickly. So the reason, the short answer is that we've advanced so much in technology in terms of being able to sequence a virus and very quickly manufacture messenger RNA corresponding to the proteins of interest, that it was possible to very quickly make this vaccine and test it.
I realize the clock is ticking and we have a lot of questions coming through the pipeline, but let me ask you one of the questions that is on the minds of many people is, how did they get through phase 1, 2, and 3 trials so fast?
Yeah.
There were concerns about, pressure from the White House and so on. Were there?
Yeah. So
are you confident this was a totally legit process?
I believe so. So I think what happened in this case is the first phase 1 trials are just to look at safety. And so those are pretty quick. Those can be carried out in a month or so to determine whether they're safe or not for use in humans. And then the phase 2 looks again in a larger number of people, looking at both safety and then efficacy in terms of inducing an immune response. And so that just takes a couple of months. And then finally comes the efficacy trial when you inject it into a large number of people. In the case of Pfizer, they did it in about 44,000 people. And the key reason why it went so quickly is because there was so much disease out there. For a lot of vaccines, there's not a very high level of transmission. And so you have to wait a long time for the cases to arise in your study population. There was so much infection out there in the populations that had been vaccinated that they were able to collect sufficient numbers of cases within 2 months. And so a big part of the reason was because of this very rapid case accumulation that could occur.
We should point out too that, they also began manufacturing of this vaccine in a very unusual way. They started manufacturing preparations even during phase 1 with the risk that they could lose everything.
Yes.
But that's another reason why this has been able to go so fast.
This particular figure just kind of illustrates what happened in the case of the Pfizer vaccine. So usually manufacturing occurs in stages, starting out with process development and then scale up, validation of the process, and then large scale production. Typically, this doesn't start until the middle of phase 2 for most vaccines, or even phase 3. So it's much delayed because people don't want to make the investment. It's very, very expensive. But the US government decided very early on that they were not going to stop at expense. They were going to start at the very beginning to be able to do the process development, even while they were doing the animal studies, in order to get to the point where they could get to manufacturing by the time they had the data from the clinical trials. So this is unprecedented, but that is part of the reason why we have doses in arms today, because they started as soon as they were able to with the animal studies.
And of course, because of the prevalence of the disease, they got results back faster than we would have thought. And the results came back, at least on these 2 preliminarily approved vaccines, really, really strong. I mean,
yes.
I read interviews with the scientists at different universities around the world, and it exceeded their wildest expectations and was really an emotional moment when they found out.
So the target was 50% protection. If they got 50% protection, they would be able to use a vaccine. When they looked at the data, they had 95% protection. And so that's really amazing and unexpected, I would say. But apparently, these messenger RNA vaccines induce a very robust immune response. In fact, when they measured the antibodies that were generated with the vaccine, they were higher than were generated with the infection. So that partially explains why the efficacy was so high.
All right, I want to ask you both some questions about, the strategies that individuals are going to undertake themselves in considering when to apply or whether or not to take the vaccine. So I just want to make sure we get some basic questions out here, and then other people will put out questions in chat. The first question for both of you is that a number of people have said to me, and we've seen in the online forums that we're monitoring, that, you know, because these technologies are new, they'd rather kind of take a wait and see approach and make sure that larger numbers of side effects don't materialize somehow, you know, before taking a vaccine themselves. What's your response to that kind of individual cautious approach toward these new vaccines?
Lee, would you like me to get started?
Yeah, go ahead.
And
Go ahead and start.
you can come on.
Mhm.
It boils down to a risk-benefit evaluation. If you are at very high risk of exposure and severe disease, then you should really seriously consider getting the vaccine as soon as you can. You know, that is what it boils down to. If you are a low risk individual, you may have the luxury of waiting a little bit, but even low risk individuals can develop pretty serious disease, either immediately during the infection or subsequently with long-term consequences. So yes, it still is an individual decision. It's not a requirement, but look at your own situation, discuss it with your physician, and, you know, really make a good informed decision on whether you should get it or not.
Lee, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's a good answer.
I would say that, okay, so another question is about anaphylaxis, which of course has turned out to be, you know, about 11 per million cases have developed severe allergic reactions to the disease. How much do you think people should be concerned about that? Or are there any other side effects that have presented themselves that we should know about? And you know, how much of a headline is that versus how much of a real worry is that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I did answer a question in the Q&A related to that. And so right now, the only true contraindication to receiving this vaccine is if you've had a prior anaphylactic reaction to any mRNA vaccine, and these are the only two, or you know, anaphylaxis to any of the vaccine components. And so the other components besides the mRNA itself are lipids and polyethylene glycol or something called polysorbate. So polysorbate is actually not in the vaccine, but it cross-reacts with the polyethylene glycol. And so it's important, a couple of points. One is to make sure it's actually true anaphylaxis, meaning that really immediate within minutes, and definitely within the first 4 hours of significant difficulty breathing, low blood pressure, requiring epinephrine, requiring treatment at an emergency department. Others who have allergies that maybe are hives or wheezing, but not actually anaphylaxis, they're of course encouraged to discuss it with their physician, but it's not a contraindication, and they will be monitored though for 30 minutes. And so there is a pre-screening form that is used by all of the sites who are administering the vaccine. And so if you do have a history like me, I have a history of pretty bad rash to one of the common antibiotics. And so you check on it, and then, you will be directed to wait, things like that. So, but in terms of the other major safety issues, we really haven't seen it. And of those 21 cases, or 11 per million, but it was really 21 cases that was reported in the CDC's morbidity MMWR, Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report. None of them were fatalities. All of them were treated effectively, and yeah, there were no fatalities. So it's not insignificant. But I would say that, again, like Dr. Chang mentioned, the risk of getting COVID and getting very sick from COVID and potentially having some very long-lasting, long hauler symptoms is very real compared to, perhaps some of the very common other side effects, the sore arm, maybe a little bit of fever, good signs that your immune systems are working. So it's an individual decision, but the only true contraindication is if you've had anaphylaxis to the prior vaccine.
Yeah, I think it's important. We humans are sometimes not good at looking at big statistical data sets and assessing our individual risk, but it's important to realize that the prevalence of these reactions are really rare and that they have not been fatal. And compared to the risk that COVID presents, even for really comparatively low risk individuals, is much, much higher. The math is not close. Just like flying in an airplane is safer than hurtling down the highway, the vaccine is a safer, statistically speaking, risk by far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a lot of other questions that people have. We'll go a little bit over time in this webinar, but I want to make sure that we bring on our other guest as well. Dr. Buenconsejo-Lum and Dr. Chang, please, if you don't mind, continue answering questions in chat. I know there's a lot of questions about that people with different comorbidities, pre-existing conditions, women who are pregnant or thinking of getting pregnant have about the wisdom of getting the vaccine. By the way, I believe the answer in all those cases is that, most of the associations of specialists in those areas believe that you should get vaccinated in all of those areas that I've mentioned. But people will have more specific questions there. Please continue answering them. But because we're assembling educators here, we want to make sure we get to some of the communications questions, the demographic questions, and the ethical and policy questions too. So thank you very much for joining us today. You'll still be with us on chat, and shoot us a message if you want us to answer something else as the webinar progresses.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to bring on Soo-Yun Shin now, who's a professor in communicology, to talk about the strategies for combating misinformation and the strategies for just assuaging anxieties that individuals might have. As I was thinking about our segment, it occurs to me we're living in a kind of golden age of misinformation. That we all know. What we may not know that you may is, what does the research suggest are some of the best strategies for getting good information circulating and disarming misinformation?
Thank you for having me. So, like you said, we are living in the age of misinformation. There's an information overload. So it's sometimes hard to find hard to find the good information out of all the information available to us. So there have been many research done on how to fight misinformation and how to correct misinformation. And then, of course, there are some mixed findings because we have a lot of research going on. But today I will introduce you some of the most consistent findings we have been finding in the literature. So the first thing is that the correction information about the misinformation, when it comes from expert sources like the government agency or media agency, they tend to work much better than other sources like peer sources. And then second thing is that immediate correction, when there is a misinformation coming up, it's much better than the delayed correction. Or some research have been finding even pre-correction works. So things like even for those who are not exposed to misinformation, but if they receive that there's this kind of misinformation going on, and then this is false for this kind of reason, then they become much better at having a correct information. And then third thing is that sometimes people like to say, well, this is being disputed, and then there are various opinions about it. But rather than saying that, if the fact has been determined, it's important to explicitly say about what to believe and what not to believe, because when people have the doubts, it can actually decrease the motivation to have the accurate information as much as possible. And fourth, the providing alternative explanations rather than just saying it's false is important. So in other words, why this is false, and then what is a correct and better explanation for this kind of event or phenomenon is very, very important. And then another thing is that when the fake news or misinformation has a whole narrative to it, sometimes we encounter that kind of misinformation regarding vaccine as well. So when the misinformation has a diverse aspects to it, we need to aim for completely correct every aspect of the misinformation rather than just partially correct it. I know it's a difficult endeavor, but still, again, when people have a room for doubt, it becomes a problem. So those are some of the most consistent findings. And then additionally, I like to add a recent finding and suggestion that when there's a misinformation that's already been debunked well, but it keeps popping up. For example, on social media, we see the same information that has been debunked keeps popping up somewhere and here and there. But then, and people sometimes think that, well, we've already debunked it, so you just go and look for it yourself, and then we are satisfied with it. But then thing is that that repeated misinformation is actually very effective. So the correction effort also needs to be repeated. So even though it's debunked before, we need to keep that, the correcting that misinformation. So those are the I like.
Okay, that's really good. Is there a danger in some instances encountering, for example, hard opposition, conspiracy theories, for example, like perhaps easily to demonstrate false, but cumbersome? Can there be a danger of reinscribing the conspiracy even in the refutation of it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So in early phase of the misinformation, a lot of researchers were actually concerned about that effect, the exact effect which is called familiarity backfire effect. So by confronting the misinformation, people were worried about what if we repeat the misinformation and people memorize it better and then use that information for later decisions. And the recent evidence suggests against it. So even for those who are not exposed to misinformation, if they encounter that myth versus facts, for example, that correction information with the misinformation contained in it, actually they become better at remembering the correct information and then have a better accuracy about the situation.
Okay, so you're suggesting we not let any of these things go.
Yes, we need to point by point debunk it.
And so many of the people on this webinar are faculty members. They've got students in classrooms, but we may be teaching classes outside of, this issue around vaccine and public health are outside of our areas of expertise. Do you think it's important in the classroom setting to still try to, because we're in close proximity, that it's still important to correct misinformation when it materializes? Or should we simply be referring people elsewhere?
I think for us educators, I think it's important for us to be informed first. So whenever that kind of a situation comes up when a student asks about a misinformation about vaccine, I think we need to be prepared to give good direction to that. So all of us are not medical experts. So of course, that specific information will need to be directed to the better experts for that. But then about the conspiracy theories or the things that can be easily debunked, I think we need to be informed and prepared to give a better direction. And then not only that, because there's new information about the vaccine and COVID-19 coming up every day. So I think in general, as educators ourselves, we need to provide some kind of guidelines for our students to better seek the correct information and then how to detect misinformation.
Okay, so how about with our friends? Because we're also encountering online, on Zoom dinner parties, all sorts of reticence, soft opposition, concern, some of it informed, some of it not so informed. Any tips for engaging with not necessarily hard anti-vaxxer conspiracies, but soft concerns without coming off like a scolding jerk?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So unfortunately, we receive misinformation from the ones we care. So like best friends, family members. And then sometimes it gets into arguments, heavy arguments. And then we want to avoid that. At the same time, we want to give the correct facts. So I think in that interpersonal context, I think it's important to remember a few things. Like, we don't want that person to feel personally attacked. So in other words, we don't want that person to feel like I'm thinking less of you. So because once that person feels that way, any good information coming from me will not be heard. So avoid that kind of a personal attack would be the first thing. And then second thing is, it's important to remember that persuasion takes time, especially for the topic that people have a lot of interest and involvement in it like that. So we need to, we shouldn't expect that one conversation we have will change this person's perception about the COVID-19 and vaccine. But then we need to keep at it, because the research says that consistency is what's really important. So those will be the things I would suggest. So be patient, and then be ready to provide expert sources for that matter. And then do not personally attack the conversation of partner.
It's good practice too, this vaccine conversation, because obviously misinformation is circulating about elections, circulating about climate change. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the facts maybe are even easier to represent than in some of those other issues. But I think what you're saying is all of us have a responsibility to try and spread truth rather than to allow misinformation and falsehoods and misperceptions to have their own pandemic contagion. Yes.
I think we are all responsible for how things are going, and we need to put our effort into making situation better.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert.
I want to shift the conversation now to vaccine equity, which is related to vaccine communication, in that many of the groups most ravaged by COVID are also those who are least plugged into traditional communication and media outlets, maybe least accessible through large organizations, and sometimes with good reason quite distrustful of all sorts of authority figures. And so to help us sort through how best to reach our most vulnerable populations, but including those who might be hardest to reach, I want to bring Neil Palafox into the conversation. Aloha, Neil.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me on this interchange here.
Sorry, we're running a little bit late. We'll go about 10 minutes over for the webinar, so that's fine. So bear with us, folks. We want to get to the Lieutenant Governor too, and we will continue to try to get to your questions online. Neil is a professor at JABSOM, and he's PI on NIH and CDC grants on cancer prevention and control among Pacific Islanders. He's an expert on health policy and mitigating health inequality, which we've of course been hearing a lot about during this pandemic. And he serves on no less than 4 COVID-19 response teams. Really, all of our panelists today are serving, are both working at the university and serving the state, and a lot of the planning and strategy on all aspects of this pandemic response. I guess, Neil, the first set of questions I have for you concerns the population that you've devoted most of your career to serving, Pacific Islanders, because the statistics are pretty stark in 2 different ways. On the one hand, some island nations, Palau, Samoa, have done remarkably well, uniquely well in containing COVID. So something is working really well. But then, at least within Hawaii, there's a flip side to that too. But first, what have Pacific Islands nations been doing so much better than Hawaii and the U.S. have been? Why are some of them have been managed to be entirely COVID-free?
Yes, thank you, Robert. So briefly, some people think automatically because you're an island nation, you're protected. But island nations like Tahiti and like Guam have been hammered by COVID. They've been ravaged by it. Whereas Tonga, Samoa, American Samoa, Palau, United States of Micronesia are actually, there's no community transmission at all, 0. And it's because COVID and the transmission of it irrespective of the vaccine, is about people's behavior and government behavior. And all these countries that are COVID-free have taken the hard line of social distancing in the hardest way. Nobody in, nobody out. That is social distancing. The government has chosen to do that. The people have chosen to do that. So they're COVID free. And so there's not an accident, whereas Tahiti, Guam, and other places have not, Hawaii Island has not done that as well. So, and it's about the behavior of both those entities. And in fact, the traditional leaders in the Marshall Islands have said, you know, if you're going to bring repatriate people here, you're not going to do it in Madrid, the capital. So the traditional leaders have taken a hard line, but it is exercising the knowledge and the science around what are we going to do as a people? And they have taken that line. So that's a short answer, but that's what they've done right. They've behaved according to what the science says.
Okay. On the other hand, Pacific Islanders have fared, statistically speaking, really poorly in Hawaii and have, you know, among the highest death rates in our archipelago. You know, what have we failed those populations? What's gone wrong within the state of Hawaii for that specific population?
You know, one of the things about vaccine equity, it really is a conversation about equality versus equity. And many folks don't really understand this conversation, and it's a lot of people don't believe in equity and they don't even realize it. So to really briefly share what I'm speaking about, let's say you have rising water and people have to get onto this cliff for safety. And you have these different boxes, but people come from all kind of conditions in life and they're trying to get up here. Some people might need 4 boxes, some 3, some 1, some are in wheelchairs and can't really get up there even with 5 boxes. And so what equality is some people believe, you know, if I get 4 boxes, then everybody should get 4 boxes because it's equal. And you're not going to get 5 boxes or 6 boxes because then you're getting more stuff than me. Whereas in the equity model is we provide what people need to get on this cliff. It might be 10 boxes, but the people who are very equality minded say, no. You can't get 10 when I get 4. Now, if you put this in the COVID situation, the COVID vaccines, and let's say that we're trying to get people to COVID vaccination, the 4 boxes might represent for some populations just the information they need. But what if the boxes also mean you not only need information to get to the vaccination, but you need transportation, you need gas, or like this person in the wheelchair, you need something that we don't even have designed yet to get here. So the concept is, in order to manage equity in vaccines or other things, you have to be able to get people the stuff that they need in the way that they need so that they can achieve it. And the biggest pushback is from the larger majority populations. They believe, no, I'm going to provide the vaccines. I provided the information. Most of the people understand it. They will come. I don't understand why all these other Pacific Islanders don't come. They don't come. They don't have the correct information. They don't have the box of transportation. They don't have the economics to do so. And the information they have is not even in their own language. So that's the concept. So to apply it, what has happened, whether it's COVID and why it's stretched, is a lot of the things that they need, we are not providing for them because we feel it's extra stuff. We've gone the distance, but equity means we will go a further distance because they deserve it. They are people, and that's the only way we're going to get them to the vaccine equity model. And so I will stop there and then take the other questions, which may ride off this model.
Okay, sure. I mean, I guess, do you feel like we have not nearly enough time for this very critical topic, but do you feel like we have in motion the plans that we need in order to get vaccines into the arms of our most vulnerable residents who do fall in demographics that might be a little bit harder to reach, or are we not there yet?
Well, we're not there. We're working hard on it. There's been a lot of work on it. But this was the same thing, and even in the testing, Robert, we saw the same thing and we kind of didn't learn from it. We learned from it a little bit. So in order to get the testing done, you had to sign up online. You had to be able to speak English. You had to, all these email things, which some populations easy access, some populations, no way. They didn't have internet. They couldn't sign up. So we have to now apply all of that to the vaccination process. And we're learning, we're getting there, but far from it. And go ahead.
Okay, so obviously resources, access to technology, involvement in institutions, all of these are critical variables. I would think that distrust too, if you hail from a population that's been mistreated by, colonized by, mistreated by, bombed by America, you might have good reasons of being suspicious of government, suspicious of big companies, suspicious of authority figures. Do you think we need kind of special messaging for colonized folks so that we, in a narrow casting sort of way, meet people where they're at and assuage the fears they might justifiably have? Or do you think, it's just a matter of getting the information translated in the right way to everyone?
Yeah, so Robert, the information is a very small part. So on the trust issue, trust is something that you learn not only with how you're currently treated, but how your people have been historically treated. And so the way, and which hasn't been done well, is the only way to undo that is to change the narrative by including the people who have trust issues in creating and have agency in their own destiny. So they have to be brought into how do you solve this problem and do it early on. How do you get our people vaccinated? We will hire you. We will provide you what you need, but can you help us understand this? So they are creating what they have to create as opposed to asking the majority population, oh, can you do this for us? Can you do this for us? They have to believe they are the ones doing it. They have to do it and stay out of their way because they truly not only have the talent, but we have prevented them from being at the table. We have locked them out. Sure. And so it's one of, to answer your question, trust is built on saying, we trust you to get this done. You are talented because they are. Show us what you need. And here it is. So I know it's, but yes.
No, that's really good. On the policy side, since I'm getting ready to talk to the Lieutenant Governor, what sort of investments would you like to see in Hawaii so that we have a public health sector and a healthcare sector that's, better equipped to deliver the healthcare that everyone needs and also better equipped to weather the next emergency?
Yeah, so
long-term investments.
Yeah, it goes back to the model, Robert. So there has to be a total health literacy around that, a vaccine literacy. And the people who run the institutions, the hospitals, have to believe in the equity model. Because even if you say to them, this is what we're going to do, you get people on the other end that will not give them the time of the day. They will call the various lines they're given. The people won't talk to them. No, who are you? Why are you calling? No, you don't deserve this. And they give them a hard time. It's doctors, it's nurses, it's people in the health systems. They don't want to engage. And it's because of this equality, equity, not understanding to get people here. So the system, the majority culture has to understand what we're trying to do and actually buy into it. Otherwise, it's going to be a fight. That's why what has happened now, we've known this conditions for decades, Robert. It's never been corrected. And so the pandemic is showing the warts, the same issues. Right. So it's one where it's not simple, but from your stand is, to have the system and the people really kind of understand this, what are we trying to do? And this is what has happened. And this is the mindset, the culture change that has to happen to make an equitable model work.
Yeah, we've seen, systemic health inequities on top of social stratification exacerbated by the pandemic, and now there's the danger of those inequalities being exacerbated again by access to the vaccine. Thank you for your work in trying to make sure that we do listen and do learn. And thank you for your time and your service today.
Thank you.
I might need you to quit sharing your screen, and then I'm going to bring on the Lieutenant Governor for the final portion of our show. Josh, are you there?
Here.
All right. So, LG, you are doubly immune, both recovering from COVID and now vaccinated as an emergency room doctor, I believe. So congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it was awful to have COVID, and it was scary to be concerned about spreading COVID if I did catch it again or didn't have full immunity to my patients. So it's definitely feels like a blessing to get vaccinated, and so we want to vaccinate everybody. But the healthcare community now can function better, which is a good thing.
Sure. Yeah, I signed up very early in September for one of the Pfizer trials here in Hawaii. And I just found out the other day that I was not in because UH is moving forward with vaccinating, they're unblinding some of the participants. So I found out that I'm vaccinated as well. And I am surprised at how much relief I feel. Like, I feel like I did when I finished my dissertation. Like, I didn't know I was carrying around all this stress every time I got into an elevator or every time I walked too close to someone, but it's going to take some time. But, you know, for those of you who are further back in the queue, hang in there. It does make a big difference, both to your health, protecting others, and to your own sense of well-being, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing that. I think we're suffering a societal post-traumatic stress disorder from being isolated and maybe unsafe. So we'll vaccinate the first 200,000 people. I believe most of the people in the 1A and 1B categories by the last day of February, I'm hoping, and move aggressively forward. A lot of the questions I see are like, when are we going to get this done? It's completely contingent on having enough vaccine. We've done 86,177 shots now out of 152,000 doses. And people will say, well, what the heck? What about the other 65,000? Well, that's because some are on the schedule right now in the next 2, 3, 5 days. And we want to move as aggressively as we can to help protect our kupuna and those who care for our kupuna, and keep Hawaii going, and take into consideration the many thoughtful comments people made. Someone said they have heart disease. Why do they go later than now? Well, it's really hard. There's no good answers except that they're just slightly less risk than someone who's 79 and is otherwise healthy. Those are the kind of considerations.
Okay, so on the speed of Hawaii's response, because a lot of the questions in the chat concern that, Hawaii's done a lot better than other states in the United States in terms of COVID generally, although the US has set a very low bar in this pandemic. So in some ways, that's not saying a lot. On the other hand, our vaccine rollout has been a little bit slower than some other states. So one thing we've struggled with, I think, in Hawaii is really putting our agencies and our people on emergency footing and spending the money and hiring the people and doing what it takes to get things done. You were really critical early on of our contact tracing efforts. Do you feel like we are really, as a state, doing everything that's necessary to get this job done? We're hiring the people, we're spending the money, we're setting up the sites, or should we be doing even more?
You can always do a little more, but resources are finite. If we did that extra increment of more to get the extra 40,000 shots into people an extra 10 days early, we'd have a 2-week delay, and we would do less on prevention of COVID and contact tracing now, which we had to go back and correct that mess when we did a bad job with contact tracing. We do have enough capacity now. We have, I think, 43 partners statewide. If they could get more vaccine, which we can only get it from the federal government, we can't even buy it separately. We even have people that are would be willing to buy extra vaccine for the state of Hawaii. It's just not doable. You can't go out and just call Pfizer up and say, I'll buy an extra, 2 million doses for Hawaii and vaccinate everybody. So I don't want to say we're doing a great job, but I will say we've now vaccinated 56% of the potential shots that are here, and it will increase to 62% by next week. And then people would, if I were them, I'd be thinking, well, why isn't it 95% with some small delta? We are trying to be mindful to have our kupuna, if they schedule a visit that it might be 5 days from now, that's when they get their shot. If we gave that shot to someone in a walk-in basis, then we'd have to cancel those individuals. They wouldn't be able to make their plans with their life. It would be chaos. So that was a consideration. We did have the discussions. Maybe you just open it up. You can dumb the whole thing down. Just say everyone over 65 gets shots, so no matter what. Stand in line for 12 hours, and until we run out, we run out. But that was neither equitable or the best way to decrease morbidity and mortality. In other words, sickness and dying. So we're doing as well as we can right now as a state, and we're simultaneously trying to keep ourselves as the lowest COVID state, that have the lowest rate, lowest mortality at the same time. So these are the things that we're balancing. It will get a lot better. I will share with the group because I know we're already over time. When we touch into March and we get additional emergency use authorizations for, say, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, that's when you'll see an enormous surge in vaccine, I believe, that will be available. And that's when I think we can accelerate groups a lot more. I would expect to get to hear that we're going to get between 30 and 50,000 doses probably per week. So 120,000 to 200,000 doses per month. And we'll get closer and closer to having them all out each week that passes now that we have the big sites.
Once multiple vaccines are available, some of them might be reporting rates from phase 3 trials at lower rates of efficacy than the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. But I think it's important for people to realize that when we get vaccinated, it's an act both of service and of self-protection. We're trying to help us all get to herd immunity and not infect other people as well as protect ourselves. But is there any other answer you have for people who might, want to skip Johnson & Johnson and wait for Pfizer?
It's really going to be a personal decision. My wife told me the other day she may very well take the shot that just confers 70% immunity if it's only one shot, because she's not worried. Jamie's a little younger than me. She's 43. I'm 51 next week. So, people make different decisions about these things. Some people feel that, first of all, we should offer the shots that work the best to everyone equitably, per what Neil was saying, Dr. Palafox was saying. I think that is the moral thing to do and the ethical thing to do, both. I do think, though, that there could be a lot of value in shots that can get out to people earlier if they choose to take it. People in rural communities, people all across the world where you might otherwise have to wait several months until we can get the deeply refrigerated or frozen vaccine out there. Certain parts of our population do have significant challenges, and the probability of them coming back for a second shot might be very low. Our houseless community may prefer to get one shot because they may prefer to not be tethered to a requirement they may never hear about. There's just a lot of very difficult social considerations, but I'm going to try to do all I can to get as many shots to people that choose to take it. Will not be mandatory, and the best shots that are available. We should not at all allow economics to factor into this, and we will get there. I appreciate people being patient. It is a hard situation because I get hundreds of calls every day. Why can't I get my shot yet? I have this risk. And everyone is correct on some level. Even people who are very low risk have a psychological argument to make.
So I know that, you and we are trying to balance equity and efficiency in vaccine distribution, also COVID and public health matters, and keeping the economy running. As more people get vaccinated, do you see some opportunities and when to, for example, open tourism or open gyms to people who are vaccinated in addition or different from those who present a negative COVID test, for example? Like, how soon should we start implementing those kind of decisions do you think?
February 15th and March 1st, I think we should do it. And I think we should do it deliberately to show that we have faith in the vaccines based on the science, which I do. I think February 15th for inter-island and for activities that are otherwise restricted. And for people who choose not to be vaccinated, that's okay. I think it's a personal choice, especially because it's under emergency use authorization and hasn't been fully studied like some other vaccines with quite as much breadth of time. I think that we should err on the side of extra testing and clearance. Look, people will say that could still curtail their civil rights. The virus does not acknowledge people's civil rights, unfortunately. So that is just a reality, and we all have a responsibility to being safe for ourselves and our loved ones and our neighbors and strangers that we're going to bump into and potentially infect. So this is just the reality until we reach herd immunity, at which point we can definitely be smart about things, but essentially decrease all the restrictions, and that will come in the fall. So I think we're really doing the right things, though imperfectly at times. And that's saying a lot. To do the right things is more than half the battle. To execute in a time when there's very little resource, it's not a circumstance where you can just dump $100 million and say, let's vaccinate everyone in Hawaii. We're undergoing now the greatest recession in our history. We also have some finite healthcare personnel because they're working on COVID, and our hospitals have extra work to do. But all things being equal, you'll see the vaccines get aggressively through the 1A, B, and C categories through the spring. And then individuals that are healthier have no other reason to get vaccinated except that they want it, which is a very great reason, and to be immune. Then it'll open up very widely at pharmacies with multiple options and so on. So that by summertime, a lot of these larger questions of vulnerability will be over.
Last question, since we're out of time, and kind of big picture. All of us have learned a lot in coping through this year of pandemic. Looking forward 5 or 10 years, what do you really hope that we don't forget from this period and that we apply to governing and healthcare from this point forward?
Well, I think this has proven the case that we are all interconnected from a healthcare standpoint and a global standpoint. So some of the comments that Neil made, which were speaking to equity amongst individuals that have health disparities, that's always been there, like he said, and it impacts all of us, although it was harder to see. It impacts us from an economic standpoint. It impacts us from an access standpoint for healthcare. Well, now we saw it in bold relief when I could infect my neighbor, rich or poor, black or white, Asian or Haole. I mean, it's obvious that how interconnected we are. And so our healthcare system should be universal and uniform. And that should be a priority, because the reality is, because it wasn't, we bled $5 trillion and lost 2 million lives. It's pretty stark. I mean, it's clear.
Yeah.
And so if we're smarter next time, and I've been saying this for a couple of years, that it wasn't going to be global terrorism, it was going to be a virus that took us out. Well, it did do that. It's just taking us out in multiple different ways. And these are great lessons to learn. And in the grander scheme of humanity, spending 2 years to learn this lesson and learn it well is probably well worth it, notwithstanding the heartache that we've suffered because some people will be lost.
Thanks for joining us today. It's a kind of grim day when we pass the 400,000 death mark in the United States. And this actually turns out to be the day when the first patient was diagnosed in the United States. Seems longer ago than a year, but it was to the day. There's some hope that a new administration in Washington can start federalizing some of this and getting the resources where it's needed and can help us expedite. That will take some time too, but I think we all really appreciate your tireless efforts over the last month to speak frankly and get out good information and to try to get things moving. I want to thank our other panelists who are no longer on screen, but are still communicating with you on chat. But sure, come back on actually to say goodbye to everyone if you can. These folks have really been working all day, every day for a year, trying to keep us safe, the university community and Hawaii, and we're really grateful for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you for taking the time out today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors, JABSOM and Kamehameha Schools and Hawaii Community Foundation and UH for making this possible, to the staff at ITS and Better Tomorrow and UH Communications for helping us get the word out and making this webinar function. And thanks everyone. I mean, as Sue was saying, it's our responsibility, all of us, to try to get out good information, talk with our friends, and help keep each other safe, get each other vaccinated, and try to get through this pandemic in 2021 as soon as we can. Mahalo, everyone.